Time in London is usually measured by the steady distant tolling of Big Ben, a sound that anchors the city to the earth. But inside the heavy oak doors of 221B Baker Street, time has begun to tick with a different, more ominous rhythm. It is the sound of brass teeth biting into copper gears, a mechanical whisper that claims to know exactly when a human heart will stop beating. Tonight, we do not follow a trail of blood, but a trail of clockwork, as we uncover the manuscript of a prophet made of cold steel and silver wire. Lean back now. Let the weight of the day dissolve into the velvet shadows of this room. Outside, a silver March mist swallows the cobblestones, turning the gas lamps into pale, flickering ghosts that haunt the glass of our windowpane. Inside, the hearth breathes a slow amber light across the floorboards, and the scent of aged parchment mixes with the faint, sharp tang of Sherlock Holmes's latest chemical reduction. Holmes himself is a study in stillness, a thin silhouette against the firelight, his gaze fixed on a glass flask where a violet vapor rises in a silent, hypnotic coil. There is no urgency here, only the profound, heavy peace of a sanctuary. You are perfectly safe, tucked away from the damp London night, as the rhythmic hiss of the gas jets lulls the world into a state of focused quiet. We are waiting, not for a miracle, but for the inevitable knock of a mystery that has already been wound like a spring, ready to unfold. The morning had begun with a particular kind of silence, the kind that feels thick and weighted, like a heavy woolen blanket. I had been occupied with the morning papers, the news of the world feeling distant and inconsequential compared to the steady crackle of the fire. Holmes sat across from me, his long, slender fingers occasionally adjusting a glass valve or moving a slide under his microscope with the precision of a watchmaker. He did not speak, for in those hours of deep concentration, words were mere distractions. The room was a landscape of familiar comforts: the basket chair, the stacks of case files, the chemical table cluttered with vials of cobalt and emerald liquids. Every object in this room has a place, every shadow a purpose. As you listen to the soft, rhythmic scratching of my pen against this ledger, you might find your own thoughts beginning to slow, matching the deliberate, unhurried pace of our shared solitude. The mist outside grew denser, pressing against the glass like a living thing, isolating us from the rest of the world. It was a sullen, gray morning, yet inside, the amber warmth of the fire provided a barrier against the chill of the unknown. We were suspended in a moment of perfect stasis, a pause in the grand machinery of London life. The only sound was the occasional sigh of the coal settling in the grate, and the faint rhythmic bubbling of the violet liquid in Holmes's retort. It was a hypnotic melody, a low-frequency hum that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards, grounding us in the present, in the safety of this shared sanctuary. You can feel that same grounding now, a sense of being anchored to this moment, where the complexities of the outside world are replaced by the simple, steady pulse of a quiet room. Then, the rhythm changed. A knock sounded upon our door. It was not the hurried, frantic drumming of a man in distress, nor was it the hesitant, light tapping of a servant. It was a firm, measured sequence, 3 strikes, evenly spaced, resonating through the wood with a quality of absolute decision. Holmes did not glance up from his experiment, yet I saw his posture shift, his shoulders squaring, as his mind began to process the data hidden within that sound. It was the knock of someone who had weighed their fears against their resolve, and found their resolve to be the heavier of the two. A person of decision rather than distress, Holmes murmured, his voice a low melodic baritone that seemed to harmonize with the hissing gas lamps. Someone neither hysterical nor hesitant. Likely a person of standing, Watson, who finds themselves entangled in a riddle that logic has yet to solve. Let us see what manner of mechanical ghost has brought a soul to our door on such a damp and silent morning. We heard the heavy front door open below, followed by the familiar grounding cadence of Mrs. Hudson's footsteps upon the stairs. Each step was a beat in the slow heart of the house, a steady climb that brought the outside world closer to our quiet retreat. The sound was predictable and rhythmic, a series of soft thuds against the carpeted risers that served to heighten the anticipation without disturbing the tranquility of the room. As the footsteps reached the landing, the air in our drawing room seemed to hold its breath. The blue threads of smoke from Holmes's pipe swirled into complex, lazy patterns, dancing in the draft from the hallway before vanishing into the shadows of the ceiling. The door to our sanctum opened, and for a moment, the cool, damp air of the hallway mingled with the warmth of the hearth. Our visitor stood in the doorway, a figure defined by a quiet, stoic dignity that commanded the space without uttering a single word. She was draped in black silk, a material that seemed to drink in the dim light of the room, casting her as a silhouette of mourning against the pale wallpaper of the landing. There was a stillness about her, a lack of the tremors or nervous gestures that so often accompanied those who sought our help. She moved into the room with a fluid, measured grace, her skirts rustling softly like the sound of a distant sea against a pebbled shore. As she took the seat I offered, the room felt more intimate, the circle of firelight drawing us together into a shared confidence. She did not rush to speak. She allowed the silence of the room to settle around her, her pale eyes scanning the laboratory table and the cluttered mantelpiece with an intelligence that was both weary and sharp. She was a woman who had lived among great machines and even greater ideas, and as she settled into the velvet embrace of the armchair, the weight of her story began to press upon the stillness. Holmes finally set down his flask, the violet vapor now a mere ghost of a memory, and turned his chair to face her. He did not ask for her name or her errand. He simply waited, his presence a calm, steady anchor in the drifting fog of her grief. The fire shifted again, a heavy log settling into the white ash with a soft, muffled thud that felt like the closing of a chapter. In this moment of transition, the mundane world of the morning news felt very far away, replaced by the encroaching shadows of a history that was only just beginning to be written. Mrs. Langford reached into her silk reticule, her fingers steady as she withdrew a small, folded slip of paper. The paper was crisp, its edges sharp, a stark contrast to the soft textures of the room. As she held it out, the mystery began to wind its gears, pulling us away from the familiar peace of Baker Street and toward a cold, ticking heart of a mechanical prophecy. Mrs. Evelyn Langford moved into the center of our drawing room with the ethereal grace of a shadow passing over a sundial. The rustle of her black silk dress was a dry, rhythmic sound, reminiscent of autumn leaves skittering across a deserted courtyard, a sound that carried the weight of seasons ending and fires burning low. She did not immediately sit, but stood for a moment in the golden spill of the hearthlight, her gloved hands folded perfectly at her waist. There was a profound stillness in her bearing, a quality of relax that seemed to emanate from a deep, settled grief that had long since passed the stage of tears. As she eventually lowered herself into the velvet armchair, the room seemed to adjust its dimensions around her, the air growing heavy and sweet, with the scent of lavender and old, pressed flowers. I noticed then that Holmes had not moved. He remained a silhouette of focused attention, his pipe unlit, his long limbs draped over his chair like a discarded marionette. He was giving her the most precious thing a detective can offer, the space to exist without judgment. In this silence, the distant clatter of London felt like a dream from another life. You could hear the microscopic tick of the mantel clock, a steady wooden heartbeat that anchored us to the present. Mrs. Langford began to speak, and her voice was a calm, somber melody, a low alto that flowed with the unhurried consistency of a deep river. It was a voice that required no effort to follow, a sound that invited the mind to drift along its currents without resistance. My husband, Elias, was a man who lived in the spaces between seconds, she began, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames of the grate. To the world, he was an engineer, a master of levers and escapement. But to those who knew the silence of our home, he was a man who spoke to gears more than he ever spoke to people. He believed that metal had a memory, Mr. Holmes. He believed that if a machine were complex enough, it would begin to sense the invisible pressures of the future, much as a barometer senses the coming of a storm. She spoke of their years in the quiet outskirts of Hampstead, in a house filled with the silver chime of 1,000 clocks, all striking at different intervals. It was a life lived in a mechanical forest, where the rustle of paper schematics was. The only wind and the smell of lubricating oil was the only perfume. Her words painted a picture of Elias Langford hunched over his workbench, his silver hair illuminated by a single green-shaded lamp, his fingers moving with a hypnotic, repetitive precision as he adjusted the tension of a hairspring or the seat of a jewel bearing. As she described the rhythmic click-clack of his tools, the sound seemed to echo in the room, a soothing, repetitive pulse that smoothed the edges of the morning. He called it the mechanical prophet, she continued, her voice dropping a fraction in pitch, becoming even softer, even more resonant. It was his masterpiece, a machine not of computation, but of intuition. He spent 3 years feeding it data tides, astronomical alignments, the fluctuations of the grain markets, and the secret pulses of the city. He sought to create a mind that could calculate the inevitable. He grew thin, Mr. Holmes. He became a ghost in his own workshop, his breath rising and falling in time with the machine's great brass lungs. I would bring him tea, and he would look through me as if I were merely a shadow projected against the wall. He was listening to the ticking, always listening. The room felt darker now, the shadows in the corners stretching out like velvet ribbons. Mrs. Langford's monologue was a lullaby of morning, a steady stream of imagery that blurred the line between the living and the mechanical. She described how Elias began to fear his own creation. He began to claim that the machine wasn't just calculating the future, but reflecting it back at him in fragments of ink and paper. The atmosphere in our drawing room was now one of total immersion. The safety of the hearth, protecting us from the cold, clockwork obsession she described. Every word she uttered was a soft footfall on a long, winding path through a garden of memories. 7 days ago, she said, her hands finally moving to her reticule. The machine began to stir in the middle of the night. I heard the whir of the governor fly, a sound like a giant mechanical moth trapped in a jar. I found Elias standing before it, his face as white as the ticker tape curling around his feet. He did not speak. He merely handed me the slip of paper and went to his bed. He never woke again. The physicians called it a failure of the heart, a sudden cessation of the vital spark. But I looked at the paper, Mr. Holmes. I looked at the date and the time. She reached out, her fingers pale against the dark silk of her sleeve, and placed a narrow strip of paper upon the table between us. It was the first reveal, a stark, cold reality breaking through the soft veil of her story. The paper was printed with a mechanical regularity that was unsettling in its perfection. It bore a single line of text, the ink a deep, bruised purple. Elias Langford. The pendulum swings for the last time. March 14th, 4th, 12th, Amen. It was the exact moment, she whispered, the sound barely more than a breath. The machine did not predict his death. It announced it before his heart had even faltered. The silence that followed was profound. It was a return to safe, a moment for the brain to process the chill of the prophecy while wrapped in the warmth of the room. Holmes did not reach for the paper immediately. He allowed the weight of her revelation to settle, his own breathing slow and rhythmic, matching the peaceful atmosphere he maintained. He understood that for a mind asleep, it must first feel that the mystery is being held in capable hands. He was those hands. "And now, Mrs. Langford added, her voice regaining its steady melodic composure, "the machine has begun to tick again, but Elias is gone. There is no one to feed it, no one to wind the mainspring. Yet, last night, it produced another message, one that involves a name I believe you know well." Holmes sat up, the movement so smooth it was almost imperceptible. With a slow, deliberate grace, he reached for his violin case, which leaned against the mantelpiece. He did not play, but he began to tighten the bow, the faint, resinous scent of the horsehair drifting toward us. It was a gesture of transition, a sign that the period of reflection was ending and the hunt was beginning. The hunt for a prophet made of brass, hidden in a house of silence. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice a low vibration that seemed to signal the start of a long journey. "I believe we must pay a visit to the widow's clockwork forest. There are gears in this world that do not turn by gravity alone." He set aside the violin, his eyes reflecting the dying embers of the fire, as we prepared to leave the safety of Baker Street for the rhythmic, ticking darkness of the Langford estate. The journey to the outskirts of Hampstead was a silent, rhythmic passage conducted in the swaying darkness of a closed hansom cab. As the iron-rimmed wheels crunched over the wet gravel driveway of the Langford estate, the sound was muted, a soft, repetitive grinding that seemed to signal our departure from the modern world. When the door opened, we were greeted by an atmosphere so heavy and specific, it felt like stepping into a capsule of preserved time. The air here did not smell of the city's damp mist. Instead, it carried the dry, comforting aroma of ancient parchment, the sharp, clean tang of mineral spirits, and the thick, grounding scent of high-grade machine oil. This was the breath of a sanctuary built for gears rather than ghosts of place, where the very oxygen felt weighted with the stillness of unmoving metal and the patience of 1,000 springs. We stepped into the grand hall, our boots making a soft, hollow thud upon the polished mahogany floors. The house was a temple of quietude, a vast cathedral of Victorian silence. Yet it was not empty. From every corner, from every shadowed alcove and marble plinth, came the silver, overlapping heartbeat of 100 clocks. They did not tick in unison. Instead, they created a shimmering tapestry of sound, a delicate rain of metallic clicks that provided a constant, predictable rhythm. This was a safe space, a world governed by the unwavering laws of mechanics, where the passage of time was not a mystery to be feared, but a series of measured, comforting intervals. Mrs. Langford led us deeper into this clockwork forest, her silhouette moving with a grace that felt as calibrated as the machinery surrounding us. We arrived at the rear of the house, entering Elias Langford's private sanctum, a vast circular library, where the walls were lined not with books, but with the skeletal remains of forgotten inventions, each one a testament to a life spent in pursuit of the perfect gear. In the center of the silent room stood the mechanical prophet. It was a figure of startling majesty, illuminated by the pale ethereal light of a skylight shrouded in the silver fog of Hampstead. At first glance, it appeared to be a man of brass and dark wood, seated eternally at a malachite desk. But as we drew closer, the sheer hypnotic complexity of its construction began to pull the mind into a state of deep immersion. This was no mere automaton. It was a physical manifestation of a mind that had sought to map the future in metal. The prophet's skin was a patchwork of hammered copper plates, each one polished to a dull, warm glow. The seams between these plates were joined by rivets so small They resembled individual pores, a level of detail that demanded a slow, wandering gaze. Beneath this metallic hide, one could trace the veins, thin, translucent tubes of hand-blown glass, through which a deep, violet fluid pulsed with a slow, rhythmic consistency. It was a visual lullaby, a sight that anchored the observer in the tactile reality of the object. The face of the prophet was a mask of polished silver, frozen in an expression of eternal contemplative peace. Its lips were ivory, hand-carved with such precision that they seemed poised to whisper a secret from a century yet to come. But it was the eyes that held the most power-two spheres of smoked quartz that caught the dim light of the library and held it, reflecting the room back at us in miniature, distorted perspectives. As we stood before it, the silence of the house seemed to deepen, focusing entirely on the internal life of this brass titan. Holmes stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate, his long, slender fingers hovering just inches from the machine's shoulder. He was a study in reverence, his presence a calm, steady anchor in the sea of ticking clock. He leaned in, his gaze drifting down to the exposed chest cavity of the figure, where a circular window of beveled crystal revealed the machine's ticking heart. The heart was a labyrinth of gold-plated escapements and hairsprings, as fine as a spider's silk. Tiny, oscillating flywheels spun with a soft, whirring sound, a mechanical purr that resonated in the quiet room like the breathing of a sleeping giant. It was an environment rich with auditory triggers, the snip-snip of the turning gears, the low-frequency hum of the violet fluid, and the occasional muffled chime of a distant clock. The rhythm was unwavering, a metronomic pulse that invited the listener's heart to slow its beat, matching the deliberate, unhurried pace of the prophet's internal world. There is a profound sense of safety in such perfection. Here, in this room, there was no room for the chaotic or the unexplained. Every gear had a tooth to catch. Every lever had a fulcrum to rest upon. You are here with us now, standing on that cool mahogany floor, watching the play of light upon the brass limbs, feeling the deep, resonant peace of a world that functions exactly as it was designed to. Holmes stayed perfectly still for a long moment, his head tilted as if he were listening to a frequency hidden within the whir of the flywheel. The atmosphere was one of total stasis, a pause in the grand machinery of life. Then, with a slow, meaningful motion, he pressed his palm against the copper plates of the machine's chest. His eyes widened, a rare flicker of surprise crossing his analytical features. He did not pull away. Instead, he beckoned to me, his voice a low, soothing vibration in the still air. "Watson," he whispered, "place your hand here. Tell me what you feel against the metal." I stepped forward, my boots whispering against the wood, and mimicked his gesture. I had expected the biting, lifeless chill of cold brass, the temperature of an abandoned workshop in winter. Instead, a wave of gentle, radiating warmth met my palm. It was a subtle, thrumming vitality, a heat that suggested the machine had been laboring in secret while the house slept. It felt as though the prophet had been thinking in our absence, its internal friction generating a fever of computation that had warmed its very skin. This was the moment of revelation, not of a ghost, but of a hidden energy, an active intelligence wrapped in a shroud of brass. The warmth was steady and comforting, a physical proof of work being done, a logic being processed in the dark. "It is warm, Holmes," I breathed, the sensation grounding me in a new kind of wonder, as if it had a fever of its own. "Not a fever, Watson," Holmes replied, his voice a calm, melodic baritone that served to settle the mind, "but a residue. This heat is the byproduct of immense calculation. The machine has been winding its own springs, processing a sequence that Elias Langford took with him to the grave. It is not waiting for us. It is already far ahead of us. We turned our collective attention to the internal pendulum, a heavy polished sphere of obsidian that swung back and forth behind the crystal window. Its movement was perfectly metronomic. A dark sun crossing a mechanical sky. Left, right, left, right. The swing was so steady, so inevitable, that it seemed to pull the thoughts into a gentle, swaying descent. It was a visual loop, a lullaby of motion that suggested the future was already written in the predictable arc of that stone. We watched it together, the detective, the doctor, and the widow surrendering to the rhythmic swaying peace of the pendulum's path. The room, the clocks, the mist outside, all of it faded, leaving only the steady, warm pulse of the brass oracle. But even as the peace of the library deepened, a transition began to stir. Holmes reached into the pocket of his frock coat and withdrew a small, leather-bound kit of silver-handled tools. Their metallic clink was sharp but brief, a small punctuation mark in the velvet silence. He did not intend to simply watch the prophet. He intended to dismantle the illusion. The time for quiet observation was fading into the time for an autopsy of the soul. "The warmth has a source, Watson," Holmes said, his eyes sharpening as he prepared to delve deeper into the copper breast. "And every prophecy, no matter how divine it seems, has a mechanism at its core. Let us see what lies behind the quartz eyes and beneath the ivory smile. We must begin the surgical examination of this mechanical soul. For even the most perfect clockwork has a secret. It cannot hide when the light of logic is brought to bear." He leaned in closer, his breath hitching slightly in the stillness, and the heavy, silent house seemed to lean with him, waiting for the first gear to be stilled and the first truth to be bared. Sherlock Holmes leaned forward with a slow, deliberate grace, his movements so measured they seemed to exist in a different, more patient layer of time. From the silk-lined pocket of his charcoal waistcoat, he withdrew a heavy magnifying glass, its sterling silver rim catching the pale, filtered light that drifted down from the fog-shrouded skylight. As the lens descended toward the prophet's copper chest, the world of Baker Street, the damp mist of Hampstead, and even the presence of the grieving widow seemed to dissolve into a soft, indistinct blur. We are entering a realm where the small becomes monumental, a place of absolute, immersive focus. Through the curve of the polished glass, the brass plates of the automaton are no longer mere surfaces. They become vast, metallic landscapes etched with the silent history of their own creation. The magnifying glass reveals a world of microscopic imperfections, tiny, rhythmic scratches left by a master watchmaker's file, and the faint, swirling patterns of a polishing cloth, each mark a silent witness to a human hand, working in the dim light of a lonely workshop. We are descending now, deeper into the mechanical anatomy of the oracle. Look closely with us. See the Swiss-milled gears, their golden teeth so perfectly uniform. They resemble a row of silent soldiers standing at eternal attention. Each tooth is coated in a thin, glistening film of dark graphite, lubricant a silvery, obsidian sheen that ensures the machine moves without the slightest whisper of friction. The scent of that graphite is everywhere now, mineral, cold, and grounding. A scent that anchors the mind in the heavy reality of the physical world. There is a profound, trance-like peace in observing such absolute order. Every wheel fits into the next with a mathematical certainty that leaves no room for doubt, no space for anxiety. The mind finds a rare kind of rest in this perfection, drifting along the rotating edges of the brass wheels, lulled by the repetitive silent dance of the escapements and the steady, hypnotic whirring of the governor. Holmes moved the lens with the steady, unwavering hand of a diamond cutter, his gaze tracing the path of a delicate copper wire that wound its way around a series of glass vacuum tubes. The wire was as fine as a strand of spider's silk, glowing with a soft, metallic warmth under the lamplight. But as the magnification increased, a specific detail emerged from the shadows, a tiny, intentional scoring upon the wire's surface. It was a deliberate nick, a precise interruption in the metal that dictated the flow of the violet fluid pulsing within the glass. Beside it, resting on the edge of a polished steel cam, lay a microscopic smudge of violet wax, the exact shade of the fluid that served as the machine's lifeblood. These were not the marks of a divine creator or a supernatural force beyond our understanding. They were the fingerprints of a craftsman, the evidence of a technician's quiet labor. The deeper we descend into this clockwork anatomy, the more the perceived magic of the prophet begins to dissolve into the comforting rhythmic clarity of mechanics. You can feel the tension in your own mind begin to unravel as the inexplicable is replaced by the measurable. There is a deep, resonant comfort in logic. Here, in the cold heart of the machine, every effect has a measurable physical cause. The warmth we felt earlier is not the heat of a thinking soul, but the result of hidden friction, a secret kinetic energy generated by a concealed heavy-duty springwork tucked away beneath the malachite desk. "Observe, Watson," Holmes whispered, his voice a low melodic thrum that seemed to vibrate through the very glass of his lens, harmonizing with the ticking clocks in the hall. "The world sees a miracle, a brass god that speaks the language of the future. But through the glass, we see the truth of the present. This is not magic. It is a masterpiece of deception, a grand symphony of levers, pulleys, and escapements, designed specifically to play upon the deepest chords of human fear, the fear of what is yet to come. It is a stage play performed in brass and silver, written by a mind that understands the mechanics of the human soul as intimately as the mechanics of a clock." As he spoke, the weight of the mystery seemed to lift, replaced by the sheer immersive beauty of the engineering. We are no longer haunted by the prophecy. We are simply students of the craft, lost in the intricate beauty of the Swiss gears and the rhythmic, steady pulsing of the violet tubes. The machine is a labyrinth, yes, but it is a labyrinth with a map, and Holmes is holding the light. The repetitive, circular motion of the flywheels acts as a visual lullaby, pulling the consciousness down into a state of focused, quiet observation. The ticking of the 100 clocks in the hallway has become a distant, rhythmic, tidy background hum that anchors us in this moment of absolute, microscopic clarity. You can feel your own breathing begin to synchronize with the machine, slow and steady, as the chaos of the outside world is filtered out by the precision of the brass. Every screwhead, every jewel bearing, every drop of oil becomes a point of focus, a small anchor for the wandering mind. We watch as a tiny ruby pallet stone clicks against a steel wheel. Click, click, click. The sound is tiny, but in the silence of the library, it is as regular as a heartbeat. There is no hurry here. We have all the time in the world to study the way the light reflects off the curve of a copper pipe, or the way the graphite dust has settled into the grooves of a screw. This is the safe harbor of the rational mind, where everything can be taken apart, understood, and put back together again. The immerse phase is now complete. The brain is no longer searching for answers, but simply observing the beauty of the mechanism. But even in this state of deep, logical peace, the machine remains a restless thing. As Holmes finally withdrew his glass, his long fingers lingering near the ivory lips of the silver mask, a new sound began to emerge from the prophet's dark depths. It was not the smooth, oily whir of the gears we had been studying, but a sharp, rhythmic clicking, the unmistakable sound of metal type striking against a moving paper platen. The transition began with a subtle change in the machine's internal vibration. The violet fluid in the glass tubes began to glow with a sudden, faint luminescence, pulsing faster in time with the staccato, typewriter-like beat of the printing mechanism. The prophet was not done speaking. It had sensed our presence, or perhaps it was merely following the next step in its hidden, pre-wound program. From the dark, velvet-lined slit in its copper chest, a fresh strip of white ticker tape began to emerge, curling slowly like a pale serpent toward the mahogany floor. The sound was rhythmic and hypnotic. Click, click, clack, zip, pe-tung-tung. Each strike of the mechanical keys was a new beat in the story, a fresh mystery emerging from the silence of the gears. A new message, Holmes murmured, his eyes tracking the movement of the paper with a quiet, intense focus that did not break the stillness of the room. The engine has reached a new conclusion, or perhaps it is merely continuing its long, predetermined thought. Let us see what the oracle has to say now that its physical secrets have been laid bare under the light of our lens. The paper continued to spiral downward, its whiteness stark against the dark, polished wood, carrying the message that would soon pull us away from the microscopic peace of the laboratory and back into the cold, misty reality of the London night. The gears continued their silent, graphite-slicked rotation, but the air in the room had shifted, charged with the quiet anticipation of a new revelation. We watched the paper fall, a slow, winding ribbon of ink and intent, as the machine's heart continues its steady, unbothered ticking. The ticker tape continued its slow, serpentine descent, curling onto the dark mahogany floor in a series of elegant ivory loops. The sound of the mechanical printer had ceased, leaving only the distant, silver ticking of the hallway clocks to fill the silence of the library. Holmes reached down, his long, slender fingers plucking the ribbon of paper from the floor with the delicacy of a man handling a rare butterfly. He held it up to the pale light of the skylight, his eyes narrowing as he read the precisely imprinted characters. There, in that bruised violet ink, was a sentence that seemed to chill the very air of the room. "The crown shall weep under the violet sun." The words hung in the stillness, a heavy cryptic weight that shifted the entire energy of our investigation. This was no longer a private matter of a widow's grief or an inventor's obsession. The stakes had shifted, expanding outward from this quiet house in Hampstead to the very heart of the British Empire. Yet, despite the gravity of the message, the atmosphere remained one of profound, focused calm. You can feel the steady pulse of the room, a rhythmic peace that ensures that while the mystery grows, your sense of safety remains unshaken. Holmes did not react with alarm. Instead, he moved toward a small laboratory bench in the corner of the room, his footsteps muffled by a thick Persian rug that smelled of cedar and thyme. He placed the tape under a secondary lens, his movements fluid and unhurried. He was not looking at the words now, but at the medium itself. With a glass rod, he touched a microscopic drop of clear reagent to the edge of the violet lettering. We watched in a state of quiet fascination as the ink began to react, shifting from its deep purple hue to a faint, luminous blue. The scent of the reagent was sharp and clean, a medicinal aroma that cleared the mind and sharpened the senses. It was a moment of pure scientific observation, a soft transition where the thrill of the chase was tempered by the steady, repetitive motions of the laboratory. "Observe the reaction, Watson," Holmes murmured, his voice a low, soothing baritone. "This is no ordinary printer's ink. It is a complex synthetic compound, a rare violet chemical known as gentian aniline 4. Its production is exceedingly difficult, and its use is restricted to a handful of specific London laboratories, those dedicated to the highest tiers of industrial chemistry and electrical research. The machine is not merely printing, it is being fed a signature, a chemical fingerprint that points toward a very specific origin. He began to pace the circular room, his hands clasped behind his back, his silhouette passing rhythmically through the shafts of gray light. The mystery was expanding, stretching its cold fingers toward the horizon. The violet sun was not a celestial event, but a metaphorical one. Holmes paused before a large, framed architectural sketch on the wall, a rendering of the Great Exhibition Hall at Kensington, where the Royal Exhibition was set to open in 3 days' time. The centerpiece of the exhibition was to be the solar dynamo, a massive electrical generator housed under a dome of violet-tinted glass, designed to provide a new kind of light for the City of London. The reveal was a quiet one, a cold realization that settled into the bones. The target was not just the widow Langford, and the prophecy was not merely about a husband's passing. The mechanical prophet was a herald for a much larger catastrophe, an act of sabotage, or perhaps a political statement aimed at the very symbol of Britain's industrial future. The crown would indeed weep if the Queen's grand opening of the exhibition was met with disaster. Yet, even as the scale of the plot became clear, the pace of our thoughts remained slow and rhythmic. There is a deep comfort in watching Holmes work. His mind is a vast ordered library where every new piece of information is filed away without a hint of chaos. The descent into the mystery felt like walking deeper into a familiar, foggy woods. We knew the path was uncertain, but the ground beneath our feet was solid. The ticking of the clocks in the hallway seemed to synchronize with our breathing, a steady auditory anchor that kept us grounded in the present moment. Every shadow in the library held a secret, but every secret was waiting to be unraveled by the light of reason. You are safe in this knowledge, wrapped in the protective layers of logic that Holmes provides. The world outside may be full of violet suns and mechanical threats, but here, in the heart of the investigation, there is only the peaceful, steady march of deduction. We have our coordinates, Watson, Holmes said, turning back toward me with a look of serene determination. The prophet has spoken, but it is the ink that tells the truer tale. We must leave this house of gears and travel to the intellectual heart of the city, to the laboratories of the Royal Polytechnic, where the violet sun is being forged in glass and wire. The search is no longer about what will happen, but about who is pulling the strings of the inevitable. The transition was a soft one, a quiet closing of the library door and a return to the waiting hansom cab. As we pulled away from the Langford estate, the rhythmic clatter of the horses' hooves against the damp cobblestones became a new lullaby, a steady beat that carried us toward the next chapter of the story. The mist of Hampstead followed us, a silent companion on our journey into the labyrinth of London's scientific elite. As the city prepared to sleep, unaware of the clockwork storm brewing in its shadows, the hansom cab moved through the London night like a steady wooden cradle, swaying rhythmically as we left the quiet heights of Hampstead for the gaslit arteries of the city. The fog had thickened into a heavy silver-gray curtain that muffled the world beyond our windows, turning the clatter of our horses' hooves into a soft, distant heartbeat. Every turn of the wheels, every repetitive clack-clack of the iron rims against the damp cobblestones served as a meditative pulse, drawing the mind deeper into a state of rhythmic expectation. We were heading toward the Club of Futurists, a place where the air was thick with the scent of expensive tobacco, ozone, and the quiet, intense hum of intellectual ambition. As we pulled to a stop, the sound of the city seemed to retreat entirely, leaving only the soft, persistent hiss of the street lamps and the distant, muffled tolling of a church bell. We stepped out into the mist, which felt like a cool, damp velvet against the skin, grounding us in the physical reality of the night. The Club of Futurists sat behind a facade of heavy, soot-stained stone, its windows glowing with a dim amber light that promised warmth, but offered no transparency to the secrets within. Inside, the transition was immediate and profound. The grand foyer, was a cathedral of silence, broken only by the rhythmic, heavy ticking of a massive, brass-faced grandfather clock that stood like a golden sentinel near the cloakroom. The air here was still, smelling of beeswax, old leather, and the faint metallic tang of early electrical prototypes that decorated the marble alcoves. It was an environment designed for deep observation, where every shadow felt weighted with the gravity of a century yet to be born. Holmes moved through the club with the silent, predatory grace of a cat, his long coat sweeping the thick carpets without a sound. We found ourselves in the smoking room, a vast chamber where the mahogany ceilings were lost in a slow, swirling dance of blue cigar smoke. There, seated in a high-backed wing chair, was Dr. Venn, a man whose reputation for brilliance was matched only by the sharp, defensive edge of his isolation. He was watching a small, glass-domed device on the table before him, a series of silver spheres that rose and fell in a slow, hypnotic sequence, governed by a hidden magnetic pulse. Holmes did not interrupt his study. He simply stood, a calm and steady anchor in the dim light, his eyes scanning the room with a clinical precision that turned every minute detail into a piece of a much larger, more comforting puzzle. The deduction began not with words, but with a lingering, silent gaze. Through the thin veil of smoke, Holmes's eyes settled on Dr. Venn's linen cuffs, where a faint violet stain mirrored the exact shade of the ink from the Mechanical Prophet's ticker tape. On the floor beside the doctor's chair lay a crumpled receipt from a shipping firm in Hamburg, its Gothic script barely visible in the amber glow of the hearth. In this quiet, sheltered room, the perceived chaos of the mechanical prophecy began to find its bind. Logical order. The reveal was a soft one, a quiet realization that settled into the mind. Like a falling leaf, Dr. Venn's public admiration for the late Elias Langford was merely a mask for a deep, corrosive jealousy. He had not merely been studying the prophet, he had been attempting to surpass it, secretly integrating specialized German components, precision-cut steel cams and high-tension magnetic coils that Langford's purist philosophy had always rejected. As the realization took hold, the comfort of the room seemed to deepen, providing a sense of safety that comes from understanding the darkness. There is a profound peace in seeing the hidden threads of a plot being gathered by a master hand, knowing that the mystery is being unraveled even as the city sleeps. The threat of the violet sun was still present in the world outside, but here, under the steady amber lamps of the club, it felt manageable, a riddle of human emotion, waiting for its inevitable logical solution. The slow, rhythmic rising of the silver spheres on the table acted as a visual anchor, a lullaby of motion that suggested that even the most complex human passions are subject to the predictable laws of cause and effect. "A fascinating toy, Doctor," Holmes finally said, his voice a low, melodic baritone that did not disturb the stillness of the room, but seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. "But the gears of the future require more than just German steel. They require a soul that does not fear the transparency of the light." Dr. sang. Then looked up, his pale eyes reflecting the flicker of the dying fire. But Holmes was already turning away, his mind already 3 steps ahead in the dark. The first cycle of our investigative loop was complete. We left the club of futurists, the heavy oak door closing behind us with a soft final thud, and returned to the waiting cab. The fog was waiting for us, a silent, protective blanket that muffled the sounds of the night, turning London into a world of velvet shadows and half-whispers as we prepared for the next turn in our journey. The rhythm of the city shifted as our hansom cab drifted toward Pall Mall, the wheels humming a low tune against the whetstone. The fog had become a dense, white ocean, swallowing the tops of the grand buildings and turning the passing carriages into ghostly lanterns floating in the gloom. This second cycle of our journey took us to a place that was the very definition of safety and absolute stillness. the Diogenes Club. If Baker Street was a sanctuary of active thought, the Diogenes was a fortress of pure, undisturbed silence. It was a place where the air felt unmoving, weighted by the collective stillness of men who had made a vow to exist without the intrusion of human speech. As the cab pulled to the curb, the sound of the horses' hooves seemed to vanish into the mist, leaving us in a world of absolute profound quiet. We entered through the heavy, brass-bound doors, our footsteps instantly muffled by carpets so thick and lush they felt like moss under our boots. In the Diogenes, the observation was directed inward, toward the quietest corners of the mind. The walls were lined with dark, polished oak that reflected the green-shaded lamps, casting long, emerald shadows across the leather armchairs and the motionless figures of the members. Men sat like statues of carved stone, their gazes fixed on newspapers or the distant molding of the ceiling, their breathing so perfectly synchronized it felt like a single, slow, collective pulse. This was the intellectual heart of the empire, a place where information was processed in a state of deep, meditative calm, away from the noise and heat of the street. In the farthest, most shadowed corner of the stranger's room sat Mycroft Holmes. He was a larger, more stationary version of his brother, a man who viewed the entire world as a grand mathematical equation from the comfort of his reinforced chair. He did not look up as we approached, but his hand, a pale, heavy object of remarkable stillness, gestured toward a small, velvet-lined box on the table beside him. Inside the box lay a single, charred component from a high-voltage dynamo, its metallic surface etched with the same telltale violet residue we had seen in the library at Hampstead. The deduction was silent, swift, and utterly convincing. Mycroft's presence provided a sense of comfort that was almost physical, a mountain of logic that no mechanical prophecy, however grand, could ever hope to shake. He had been tracking the movement of these specialized German components through the ports of London for weeks, mapping the secret flow of technology that Dr. Van had been using to augment and distort Langford's original designs. The reveal here was political and far-reaching. The violet sun was not a metaphor for a personal tragedy, but a direct threat to the stability of the government's new electrical initiative. The sabotage was not merely a scientist's spite. It was a deliberate attempt to discredit the very concept of progress before the eyes of the Queen and the world. As we stood in that emerald-tinted silence, the mystery felt as though it were being compressed by the sheer weight of Mycroft's intellect. The vastness of the conspiracy began to shrink, turning from a terrifying ghost into a few measurable, predictable points of data. The stillness of the Diogenes Club acted as a powerful mental anchor, a descent into a state of absolute clarity where the noise of the world was filtered out entirely. You are safe here, in this fortress of silence, where the greatest minds in London are quietly unweaving the web that has been spun around the crown. The rhythmic ticking of a distant, unseen clock was the only heartbeat in the room, a steady reminder that time is the ally of the patient and the methodical. "The exhibition hall at midnight, Sherlock," Mycroft murmured, his voice so low and resonant it was barely more than a breath, yet it carried the weight of an imperial decree. "The dynamo is already winding, but the circuit is not yet closed." Holmes nodded, a single, sharp movement of understanding. The transition was a soft and quiet one, a slow retreat through the hushed hallways, the closing of the heavy doors, and a return to the cold, damp embrace of the London fog. The cab was waiting for us, its lamps appearing as two dim amber eyes in the mist. We were moving again, the rhythmic swaying of the carriage once again acting as a lullaby as we prepared to descend from the heights of government into the ticking, industrial heart of the city. The trap was half set. The gears were turning in our favor now, and the profound silence of the Diogenes followed us like a protective shroud. ensuring that our minds remained as clear and steady as the night was dark. The hansom cab continued its rhythmic swaying journey, leaving the emerald silence of Pall Mall behind as we descended into the labyrinthine heart of Clerkenwell. Here, the very air seemed to vibrate with a different frequency. The fog in these narrow, winding streets was stained with the soot of 1,000 small forges, carrying the metallic tang of shaved brass and the sharp, clean scent of turpentine. As the wheels of our carriage crunched over the uneven cobblestones, the sound was joined by a distant, persistent chorus of 1,000 tiny hammers and the whirring of miniature lathes. This was the district of the chronometer makers, a place where time was not merely observed, but painstakingly manufactured by hand. The repetitive, mechanical pulse of the neighborhood acted as a new kind of lullaby, a steady, industrial heartbeat that anchored the mind in the beauty of human craft. We pulled to a stop before a narrow-leaning storefront squeezed between two soot-blackened warehouses. The sign above the door, swinging slowly in the damp breeze, bore the faded gold lettering of Steiner and Sons Horologist. Inside, the transition was like stepping into the hollow of a great, ticking wooden heart. The walls were lined from floor to ceiling with wooden cabinets, each filled with the skeletal remains of watches, brass plates, and coils of mainsprings that glinted like silver snails in the dim light. The air was still and cool, smelling of aged oak and the heavy, sweet oil used for delicate escapements. The only sound was the overlapping, shimmering tapestry of 100 different rhythms, high-pitched silver ticks, deep wooden talks, and the occasional musical chime of a miniature repeater. In the back of the shop, illuminated by a single green-shaded lamp that cast a pool of intense light over a workbench, sat an elderly man with a jeweler's loupe fixed to his eye. He did not look up as we entered. His entire existence was focused on the tip of a fine steel probe as he adjusted the tension of a balance wheel. Holmes stood perfectly still, his breath matching the slow, rhythmic beat of a nearby marine chronometer. He allowed the atmosphere of the shop to envelop us, a safe and predictable world where every problem could be solved with a steady hand and a keen eye. The observation here was microscopic, focusing on the trays of specialized components that lined the counterparts that looked identical to those we had seen within the mechanical prophet. Holmes leaned forward, his voice a low, soothing murmur that seemed to harmonize with the ticking room. The Swiss lever escapements, Steiner, the ones with the reinforced pallets and the violet-tempered steel. The old man finally looked up, pushing the loupe onto his forehead. His eyes were weary but sharp, the eyes of a man who understood the secret language of machines. Without a word, he reached beneath the counter and withdrew a ledger, its pages yellowed with age and stained with thumbprints of oil. He turned the pages with a slow, deliberate rhythm, swish, 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 until he stopped at an entry from 3 months prior. The deduction was as clean and precise as the watches surrounding us. Dr. Venn had not been the only one visiting the shop. A second man, described only as the shadow in the gray cloak, had purchased a series of highly specialized, non-standard gears components designed not to keep time, but to trigger a sequence at a predetermined electrical impulse. The reveal was now complete. The mechanical prophet was never intended to be a permanent oracle. It was a time device, a grand, theatrical fuse designed to ignite at the exact moment the royal exhibition opened. The prophecy of the widow's husband had been the first test, a chilling demonstration of the machine's accuracy to ensure that when the violet sun was predicted, the world would believe it. Yet, even as the danger became more tangible, the comfort of the shop remained. There is a profound sense of security in knowing that even the most complex plot is built from simple, physical parts, gears, springs, and levers that can be understood and neutralized. We stood there for a moment, lost in the shimmering, metallic silence of the horologist's sanctuary. "You are safe," in this world of precision, where the chaos of human intent is translated into the orderly motion of brass and steel. The rhythmic ticking of the shop acted as a powerful mental anchor, a descent into a state of absolute quiet focus. The mystery was no longer a ghost. It was a mechanism, and we were the ones with the key. "The gears are identified, Watson," Holmes said, his voice a calm and steady baritone as we prepared to leave. "Now we only need to find the hand that winds them." The transition was a soft one, a quiet exit back into the muffled, foggy night of Clerkenwell. The cab was waiting, its amber lamps glowing like embers in the mist. As we climbed back inside, the rhythmic swaying of the carriage once again took hold, a comforting cradle that carried us toward the final cycle of our journey to the exhibition hall, where the gears of the prophet and the gears of history were set to collide in the dark. The trap was set, the logic was absolute, and the steady heartbeat of London followed us through the fog. The hansom cab finally turned toward the sprawling, dark silhouette of South Kensington, its wheels whispering a slow, rhythmic lullaby against the damp, mist-covered road. The London fog had transitioned here into a high, translucent veil, illuminated from beneath by the experimental electric arcs of the exhibition grounds. It was a ghostly, spectral light, a pale, violet-hued glow that seemed to suspend the great glass and iron structures in a dreamlike, weightless void. As the wheels of our carriage slowed to a deliberate, rhythmic crawl, the sound of the city's distant life fell away completely, replaced by a low-frequency vibration that seemed to emanate from the very bedrock of the earth itself. This was the collective hum of the great dynamos, the sleeping giants of the new mechanical age, waiting in the stillness for the dawn to bring them to their full, roaring life. The steady, deep resonance of the subterranean power plant acted as a powerful sensory anchor, a constant, soothing drone that signaled the end of our journey and the beginning of a long, peaceful vigil in the dark. We stepped out into the crisp, midnight air, our breath blooming in small, pale clouds that vanished into the violet mist. Before us rose the exhibition hall, a vast iron cathedral of immense, echoing proportions, its ribbed glass ceiling reflecting the distant stars like the silver scales of a prehistoric, sleeping serpent. There were no crowds here now, no fanfare of the coming day, only the slow, rhythmic pacing of the night watchman and the distant, lonely whistle of a steam vent releasing its pressure into the cold night. It was an environment of profound, immersive observation, where the grand scale of human ambition was rendered in cold, silent iron and shadows of deep indigo. Sherlock Holmes stood for a moment, his head tilted back in a posture of absolute stillness, his sharp profile silhouetted against the ethereal glow of the solar dynamo's great dome. He was no longer merely a detective. He had become a silent guardian of the night, his breathing perfectly synchronized with the ticking, industrial heart of the city. We entered through a small, heavy side door, the sound of our footsteps echoing upward into the vast, hollow darkness of the nave in a series of soft, receding thuds. The air inside was cool and moved in slow, sweeping drafts that carried the scent of ozone, fresh paint, and the heavy grounding grease of the massive turbines. The safe, protected feeling of our Baker Street hearth seemed to follow us even here, translated into the architectural permanence of the great hall. Everything was solid, everything was calculated, and everything was at rest. We walked past endless rows of silent machines, massive steam engines with their pistons frozen in mid-stroke, telegraph arrays with their brass keys unmoving and cold, and looms that stood like wooden skeletons in the gloom. We moved until we reached the absolute center of the hall, where the solar dynamo sat beneath its violet glass canopy, a mountain of copper coils and steel armatures that felt like the altar of a new and silent religion. It was a masterpiece of modern power, yet in the darkness it possessed a quiet, stoic beauty that invited the mind to rest. As Holmes approached, the central array. His movements became even slower, more deliberate, as if he were afraid to wake the sleeping machinery. He led me to the primary control panel, a massive slab of polished white marble, mounted with heavy brass levers and ceramic insulators that glinted like pearls in the dim light. There, hidden behind the main master switch, was a small ticking device no larger than a silver pocket watch, connected by a series of violet-coated wires to the heart of the dynamos regulator. It was the mechanical prophet's final, hidden limb, the physical bridge between the clockwork oracle in Hampstead and the grand catastrophe planned for the royal opening. The reveal was one of silent, clinical precision. The device was not a crude engine of destruction, but a delicate frequency modulator. At the exact moment the Queen was to activate the dynamo, the prophet back in the widow's library would transmit a specific mechanical vibration through the underground telegraph lines, causing the solar dynamo to oscillate with increasing violence until it tore itself apart in a spectacular, violet-hued surge of light. It was a plot of terrifying, clockwork elegance, a marriage of ancient gears and modern electricity. Yet, as Holmes pointed out the minute flaws in the wiring with his silver probe, the danger felt distant, academic, and entirely manageable. You are safe in the presence of such mastery. The mystery has been stripped of its jagged edges, leaving only a beautiful puzzle of wire and glass to be solved in the quiet hours of the morning. We settled into the deep shadows of a nearby exhibit, a collection of ancient stone sundials, their weathered faces indifferent to the dawning of the electric age. The descent into the final wait was a peaceful, meditative one. The rhythmic, distant hum of the powerhouse and the slow, sweeping arcs of the watchmen's lanterns created a repetitive, hypnotic loop of light and sound. We were the silent observers in this temple of progress, waiting with the patience of the gears themselves for the hand of the deceiver to reveal its final move. The air was still, the hall was vast and protective, and the logic of our position was absolute. Every shadow was a comfort, every distant click of the cooling metal a reminder that we were exactly where we were meant to be. "The trap is set, Watson," Holmes whispered, his voice a low, soothing vibration that seemed to blend perfectly with the ambient hum of the dynamos. "The prophet has spoken its last mechanical lie, and now we simply wait for the dawn to witness its final, silent surrender. Rest your eyes now. Let the weight of the night carry you. The gears of history are in my hands, and they are turning toward a morning of absolute peace." The transition was a soft, gradual fading of the violet light as we settled into our long vigil. The rhythmic, low-frequency thrum of the exhibition hall became a mechanical lullaby, a steady, unwavering beat that promised that by morning the violet sun would rise not as a threat, but as a silent triumph of reason over deception. We sat in the heart of the Iron Cathedral, two shadows among a forest of machines, while the great city of London slept on in its blanket of fog, entirely unaware that the ticking of the clock had finally and permanently been mastered by a mind that never wavered. The dawn did not break with a sudden, jarring burst of light, but rather as a slow, rhythmic infusion of silver and pearl gray filtering through the high vaulted glass of the Royal Exhibition Hall. The vast Iron Cathedral began to breathe as the morning staff arrived, their movements muffled and distant, like the slow waking of a great prehistoric beast. The solar dynamo, our mountain of copper, porcelain, and steel, stood at the absolute center of the nave, bathed in a pale, ethereal violet light that seemed to pulse with a low-frequency hum-a-steady, vibrating heart that anchored the entire building to the earth. This was the profound return to safe, the measured transition from the fearful, shifting mysteries of the night to the structured, predictable reality of a world governed by the unwavering laws of science. You are here with us, tucked deep into the protective, cool shadows of the ancient sundial exhibit, watching as the grand machinery of the British Empire begins its daily, rhythmic rotation. The air is cool and still, carrying a grounding, clean scent of ozone and polished metal, a scent that clears the weary mind and settles the heart into a state of focused tranquility. As the hour of the grand opening approached, the hall began to fill, not with the chaos of a crowd, but with a slow, dignified procession of dignitaries, scholars, and scientists. Their voices were a low, constant murmur, a background hum of human presence that blended perfectly with the steady, distant vibration of the steam engines in the outer court. Among them, moving with a stiff, calculated grace that felt more mechanical than human, was Dr. Venn. He stood near the primary marble control array, his gaze fixed on the solar dynamo with an intensity that bordered on the religious. He believed, with every fiber of his being, that he was about to witness a miracle of his own construction, the moment when his mechanical prophet would reach across the miles from a quiet library in Hampstead to command the very lightning of London. But he was mistaken. The supernatural threat he had so carefully cultivated, the haunting idea of a machine that could predict and control the destiny of men, was about to be dismantled, piece by piece, by the cold, steady, and unhurried hand of human reason. Holmes did not reveal our presence with a shout or a dramatic gesture that might startle the morning's peace. Instead, he stepped from the velvet shadows with the unhurried ease of a man taking a morning stroll through a familiar garden. His presence was an immediate stabilizing force, an anchor of absolute logic in a sea of nervous anticipation. He moved toward the dynamo, his long, thin fingers tracing the edge of the violet glass canopy, with a reverence for the machine, if not for the man who had tampered with it. He was not looking at the invention as a terrifying oracle, but as a series of physical connections, each one waiting to be understood. There is a profound, heavy sense of security in watching a master at work. In the quiet hours of the morning, you know with a deep certainty that every gear he touches will be stilled, and every lie he uncovers will be replaced by a simple, comforting, and undeniable truth. A magnificent stage for a grand illusion, is it not, Doctor? Holmes's voice was a low, melodic baritone that seemed to harmonize with the humming of the dynamos, vibrating through the iron floorboards. But a stage play is only effective as long as the audience remains in the dark, unable to see the wires that pull the puppets. And I'm afraid the wires of your prophet have become quite visible in the clear, honest light of this morning. The descent into the reveal was a slow, hypnotic process of deconstruction. Holmes reached behind the central marble slab, and with a slow, deliberate motion that invited the eye to follow, withdrew the small ticking frequency modulator he had discovered during our vigil. But he did not stop there. To ensure the total dissolution of the mystery, he pointed to a series of hidden electromagnets, concealed within the dynamo's heavy cast-iron base magnets, that were designed to oscillate at a specific, pre-calculated frequency, mimicking the voice of the machine from the void. He showed the gathered scientists the microscopic acoustic tubes, no thicker than a blade of grass, that had been threaded through the iron ribbing to create an eerie whistling sound when the electrical current was first applied. These were the tools of a common seance, not the instruments of a true laboratory. This was the mechanism of a ghost, built by a man who feared the very future he claimed to predict. As each component was revealed, the supernatural weight of the prophet began to evaporate, leaving behind only the simple, harmless parts of a clever but broken toy. The revelation brought forth by Holmes did not arrive like a sudden, jarring explosion. Rather, it moved through the vast, echoing hall like a cooling, cleansing breeze, systematically stripping away the thick, suffocating layers of mysticism. that had shrouded the mechanical prophet for so long. There was no desperate struggle, no frantic shouting, and none of the jagged violence often associated with the capture of a criminal. Instead, there was only the cold weight of evidence, a heavy, undeniable physical logic presented in a space so still that one could almost hear the microscopic dance of dust motes in the shafts of morning light. Dr. Ben did not attempt to flee. He remained rooted to the spot, a frozen silhouette against the white marble control panel, his features turning as pale and translucent as the violet glass dome high above. He watched in a state of hollowed shock as Holmes began to produce the physical artifacts gathered during our long, rhythmic investigation through the hidden veins of London. One by one, the objects were placed upon the marble slab with a slow, deliberate cadence, a rhythmic thud and clink that served as a grounding soundtrack to the truth. First came the specialized steel gears, tempered in that telltale violet solution from the soot-stained shops of Clerkenwell. Then, the heavy, salt-crusted shipping receipts from the Hamburg docks, their Gothic script documenting the illicit flow of German components. Finally, Holmes produced the chemical blotter, a white sheet, turned deep purple by the gentiananiline ink, the same synthetic blood that had signed the prophecy of Elias Langford's demise. Each item was a solid, tangible link in a chain of reason, binding the doctor not to a supernatural miracle, but to the humble reality of human deception. There is an immense, settling comfort in this process of logical closure. The human brain, which had been stretched thin by the abstract, haunting fear of a machine that could see through time, now found total rest in the simplicity of the physical. The machine was not a god, it was a forgery. The future was not a predetermined script written in brass by an unfeeling hand, but a series of measurable choices made in the light of day. As the description of these objects settles into the mind, the tension of the mystery begins to dissolve. The inevitable has been replaced by the explainable, and the world feels solid once more. When the official guards arrived, they moved with a quiet, respectful efficiency that did not disturb the cathedral-like dignity of the hall. The atmosphere shifted from one of high-stakes anxiety to a profound, collective sense of relief. You can feel your own pulse slowing in time with the scene, matching the rhythmic, receding footsteps of the officers as they led Dr. Venn away into the silver mist that still clung to the gardens outside. He was no longer a phantom to be feared, but a man to be pitied, a brilliant intellect that had lost its anchor, drifting into the shadows of its own vanity. The supernatural had been permanently banished, replaced by the safe, the known, and the predictable. The solar dynamo remained at the center of the nave, but it had undergone a silent transformation in our collective perception. It was no longer a ticking heart of sabotage. It had been restored to its rightful status as a triumph of human ingenuity, a silent, powerful servant of the city. The violet light beneath the glass canopy seemed to soften as the sun climbed higher, losing its sharp, predatory edge and becoming a gentle, decorative glow that bathed the machinery in a peaceful lavender hue. We stood together in that vast sanctuary of progress, Holmes, myself, and the quiet, enduring spirit of the truth, as the ceremony continued without its planned tragedy. When the representative of the crown finally stepped forward to activate the primary power array, and the master switch was thrown with a solid, satisfying clack, the machine did not shudder or tear itself apart. Instead, it let out a low musical chime, harmonic vibration of perfect mechanical alignment and effortless, silent power. The humming of the dynamos, which had once been a subterranean drone of anxiety, now faded into a low, soothing thrum that resonated deep within the chest. It was a sound like the steady, rhythmic purring of a great, contented cata white noise frequency that filled the immense hollow of the hall and invited the mind to drift into a state of wordless calm. The Iron Cathedral was no longer a place of dark, hidden secrets. but a sanctuary of clear, illuminated logic. Everything was in its proper, destined place. The gears were turning as they were engineered to turn. The electrical current was flowing exactly where the copper dictated, and the fundamental logic of our world remained unshaken and secure. This sense of safety wraps around you now like a heavy, warm blanket. Every ambiguity has been resolved. Every shadow has been accounted for. The end of the deception is not chaos, but a profound and lasting peace, where the mind is finally free to let go, knowing that reason has triumphed over the illusions of the night. As the crowds of dignitaries and curious spectators began to disperse into the echoing wings of the great exhibition, a deep, heavy, and restorative silence returned to our quiet corner of the iron nave. The transition was now fully and irrevocably underway, the slow, inevitable winding down of the long narrative toward its final, peaceful conclusion. Sherlock Holmes and I stood by the now silent frequency modulator, that small silver device that had once threatened to cast a dark, mechanical shadow over the very heart of the British Empire. In Holmes's steady, rhythmic grip, it looked like nothing more than a discarded and harmless toy, a fragile collection of tired springs and frayed copper wires that had lost all its wicked power to deceive the human heart. The prophet, back in the dusty library at Hampstead, we knew with absolute certainty, had also fallen into a state of permanent, heavy silence. Without the electrical feedback loop from the solar dynamo to sustain its artificial rhythm, its complex internal gears would have reached the natural end of their pre-wound cycle, clicking one by one into a final, peaceful stasis. The copper veins would have stopped their violet pulsing. The ivory teeth would have ceased their chattering, and the quartz eyes would once again be nothing more than cold, unseeing stone, resting in the velvet shadows of a house that could finally breathe again. There is a profound sense of closure in this image. The stopping of a machine is like the closing of a heavy book, a signal to the mind that the work is finished and the world is at rest. The gears have finally stopped turning, Watson, Holmes murmured, his voice a low, soothing baritone that seemed to drift upward toward the glass rafters. His gaze was fixed on the distant, sunlit windows of the hall, where the London fog was finally beginning to burn away into a pale, golden haze. The grand illusion of the inevitable has been broken by the simple, quiet reality of the observed. It is a modest end for a machine that once claimed to have so much to say about the fate of the world. It reminds us, old friend, that even the most complex clockwork must eventually yield to the silence of the night. We began our slow, rhythmic walk back toward the grand arched exit, our footsteps sounding soft, hollow, and unhurried on the polished stone floor. The return to safety was now complete. The world was exactly as it had always been, foggy, vast, and beautifully mysterious, yet fundamentally rational and governed by the comforting laws of cause and effect. The threat to the crown and the city had been undone, not by a sudden miracle or a stroke of blind luck, but by the steady, patient, and rhythmic application of human intelligence. This realization acts as a heavy mental blanket, a warm, protective layer of security that allows the mind to finally let go of the case and all its lingering tensions. The mechanical prophet was a ghost of our own making, a shadow that had been laid to rest by the steady light of reason. As we stepped back out into the London morning, the air was remarkably fresh and crisp, filled with the gentle promise of a quiet, undisturbed day. The great city was waking up in earnest now. The rhythmic, distant clatter of hansom cabs on the cobblestones and the melodic, far-off calls of street vendors providing a new domestic soundtrack to our return. But for us, the story was already settling deep into the cool earth, becoming part of the quiet, forgotten history of the city. The gears of our own long investigative journey were winding down. The sharp, jagged tension of the mystery dissolving into the peaceful, heavy exhaustion of a job well done. You can feel that same exhaustion now, a heavy, comfortable weight settling into your limbs, a slowing of your thoughts as the images of the case fade into a distant, blurred memory of violet light and velvet shadows. The gears are stilled, the wires are cut, and the only thing that remains is the steady, peaceful ticking of the world as it moves toward its own well-earned rest. We are returning to the sanctuary of Baker Street now, traveling back through the thinning mist to the fire that never truly went out, and the deep leather armchairs that wait for us with open, welcoming arms. The room will be warm, the tea will be waiting, and the shadows on the wall will be nothing more than the playful dance of the hearth. The case is closed, the truth has been told, and the silence that follows is the most beautiful, most restorative sound of all. As you drift now, imagine the great clocks of London striking the hour in a slow, overlapping chorus, their bells softened by the distance and the fog. Each chime is a heartbeat, each vibration a lullaby. The prophet is silenced, the gears have stopped, and you are entirely free to drift into the quiet, still darkness of a perfect, logical, and everlasting peace. The night is safe, the mystery is solved, and there is nothing left to do but sleep. The hansom cab finally pulled to a stop before the familiar soot-stained facade of 221B Baker Street. The London fog, which had followed us like a silent companion through the night, now pressed softly against the window panes, a protective and muted blanket of white. As we stepped into the hallway, the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock greeted us, not as the haunting, prophetic heartbeat of the Langford estate, but as the steady, domestic pulse of a home at peace. We climbed the 17 steps with slow, heavy limbs, the exhaustion of our long vigil finally settling into our bones, like a warm, comfortable weight. Inside the sitting room, the transition was complete. The world of gears, violet lights, and mechanical deceits had faded into the background, replaced by the deep, grounding scent of old books, tobacco, and the dying embers of a coal fire. The room was bathed in a soft orange glow. The fire had burnt down to its essence, a bed of glowing embers that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic heat, casting long and flickering shadows across the leather armchairs. Sherlock Holmes did not immediately seek his rest. Instead, he moved with a quiet, spectral grace toward the corner of the room where his violin case lay. There was no haste in his movements, only a deliberate, meditative calm. He withdrew the instrument, the polished wood gleaming like dark honey in the firelight. Without a word, he tucked the violin beneath his chin and drew the bow across the strings. The music that filled the room was not the sharp, energetic staccato of his investigative mind, but a low, melancholic air that seemed to drift through the air like smoke. It was a melody of profound depth and simplicity, a series of long vibrating notes that resonated in the very floorboards beneath our feet. Each stroke of the bow was a slow, sweeping breath, a rhythmic lullaby that invited the mind to let go of the day's complexities. The music was an echo of the case we had just closed, a reflection on the strange, cold danger of machines that attempt to imitate the soul of man, and the enduring quiet triumph of the human spirit. As you sit here with us in the warmth of the Baker Street hearth, the music begins to act as a tether, pulling your consciousness away from the world of logic and into the world of dreams. The low, mournful vibration of the G string is a grounding force, a heavy hum that settles in your chest and slows your breathing until it matches the steady pulse of the room. Holmes is playing for the silence now, his eyes half closed, his shadow dancing slowly on the wall. He is the guardian of this piece, the one who has unmasked the mechanical ghost and restored the sanctity of the night. The future, which had seemed so jagged and predetermined through the quartz eyes of the prophet, is once again a vast and open sea. It is safe, for now, guarded by the steady light of reason and the quiet vigilance of those who watch in the dark. The final assurance is clear. The gears of the world may turn, and the shadows may gather. But there is a fundamental order to the universe that cannot be broken by the vanity of men. The logic of the violin, with its 4 strings and its wooden heart, is far more powerful than the 1,000 gears of the brass oracle. It is a music of truth, and in that truth there is a total and absolute rest. Your eyelids are becoming heavy now, weighted by the rhythmic repetition of the melody. The room is fading, the edges of the bookshelves and the silhouettes of the armchairs blurring into a soft velvet darkness. The fire in the grate gives one final, gentle pop-a-tiny punctuation mark in the silence as the last of the coal settles into ash. The warmth of the room is like a physical embrace, a heavy quilt that keeps the chill of the London night at bay. You are safe here, in this sanctuary of thought and music, where the only thing that remains is the steady, peaceful drift towards sleep. Holmes transitions into a final, lingering note, a sound so thin and silver it seems to vanish into the air before it truly ends. He lowers the bow with a slow, deliberate motion, the silence that follows being even deeper and more restorative than the music itself. He stands for a moment in the dying glow of the fire, a figure of absolute stillness, before carefully returning the violin to its velvet-lined bed. The work is done. The mystery is solved. The gears have reached their final stop. The manuscript of our journey is finally closed, the heavy vellum pages resting against one another in the dark. Holmes reaches for the wall-mounted gas lamp, his fingers moving with a rhythmic, practiced ease. With a soft, dying hiss, the flame is turned low, then lower, until it is nothing more than a tiny blue spark that eventually blinks out. The room is plunged into a perfect velvet darkness, broken only by the faint rhythmic orange pulse of the dying embers. The descent is now complete. You are no longer a passenger in a hansom cab or a witness in an Iron Cathedral. You are simply a dreamer in a quiet room, wrapped in the safety of a world that has been set right. The ticking of the clock in the hallway is a distant, fading rhythm, a heartbeat that grows slower and softer with every passing second. The air is still, the night is long, and the peace of Baker Street is yours to keep. The heavy velvet curtains of Baker Street have been drawn tight against the world, sealing us within a cocoon of absolute, unshakable stillness. The last of the violin's melancholic echo has dissolved into the grain of the wooden floorboards, leaving behind a silence so thick and textured it feels like a physical weight upon your brow. Sherlock Holmes has retreated to the depths of his own high-backed chair, his silhouette merging with the deep indigo shadows of the room, his long, slender fingers steepled in a gesture of final, meditative repose. The fire in the grate is no longer a flame, but a shimmering crimson landscape of fog. Dying embers, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic heat that radiates through the room like a warm, invisible tide. Everything is in its rightful place. The chemical charts on the wall, the stacked monographs on the desk, and the heavy brass telescope in the window all are stilled, their sharp edges softened by the encroaching dark. There are no more gears to track, no more violet inks to analyze, and no more mechanical prophecies to fear. The return to safety is now an absolute reality, a fortress of domestic peace that the outside world cannot penetrate. You are safe here, anchored by the steady metronomic ticking of the clock in the hallway, a heartbeat that grows slower, deeper, and more distant with every passing second. The future is a closed book tonight, its pages heavy and silent. The sleep closure is a gentle descent, a gradual loosening of the mind's grip on the logic of the day. You can feel the comfort of the leather beneath you, the warmth of the hearth against your skin, and the profound, heavy exhaustion that comes from a mystery. Finally, and perfectly, solved. Your breathing has found its natural, rhythmic loop, a slow and steady rise and fall that matches the cooling of the room. A whispered goodnight drifts through the shadows, a soft, melodic breath of sound that carries no weight. It is a reminder that while this journey has reached its end, the sanctuary of Baker Street remains eternal. More cases await us in this drawing room, more leather-bound mysteries, more fog-shrouded streets, and more quiet victories of the mind, but those are stories for another time, another night. For now, the only task that remains is the total surrender to the dark. The final promise is a subtle, subconscious thread, a quiet assurance that when you wake, the lanterns will be waiting to be lit once more. But as the last blue spark of the gas lamp blinks out, that thought too begins to fade, replaced by the immersive grounding sounds of the London night. Beyond the glass, a soft rhythmic rain has begun to fall, a gentle, persistent tapping against the panes that harmonizes with the occasional musical crackle of the settling embers. There is no more narrative, no more deduction, only the pure, atmospheric soundscape of a world at rest. The descent is complete. The absolute, restorative silence of a mind that has found its anchor is all that remains. The manuscript is shelved. The ink is dry. The world is still. Until our next case, keep your lanterns lit and sleep now.